This is episode number 97, featuring artist Michael Holter.
This is the PleinAir podcast with Eric Rhodes, publisher and founder of PleinAir magazine. In the PleinAir podcast, we cover the world of outdoor painting. Called PleinAir, the French coined the term, which means open air or outdoors. The French pronounce it plein air. Others say plain air. No matter how you say it, there is a huge movement of artists around the world who are going outdoors to paint. And this show is about that movement. Now, here's your host, author, publisher, and painter, Eric Rhodes.
Thank you, Jim Kipping. This podcast is brought to you by the PleinAir Convention, the world's largest plein air event. This year it's in San Francisco in April. We're also going up to wine country. We're going to have over 80 top master artists teaching and working with you to become a better painter. We've got 4 stages, including oil, pastel, watercolor. We've also got some acrylic this year, and we're adding a lot more stuff. So, faculty includes the man who is considered to be the world's best watercolor artist, worth seeing whether you're a watercolor artist or not, Joe Zabukvik. He's coming in from Australia. You've got to see this guy. He's amazing. Also, the amazing Joseph McGurl. Both of those guys are going to do pre-convention workshops where you're going to get a day and a half with each of them. And also, you're also going to get them on stage at the regular convention, but you're going to get a lot more if you do both. The top painters like Laurie Kersey, Brian Blood, Mark D'Alessio, Richard McKinley, Susie Baker, Albert Handel, Camille Preswadik, many more. Over 80 in total going to be announced. We're painting daily, all of us together outdoors at the same places. It's historic. It's a lot of fun. It's a beautiful city. It's not all city painting. We're going up to wine country. We've got landscapes, got all kinds of things. You can learn more at pleinairconvention.com. The interview is underwritten by our free weekly newsletter, American Watercolor, with editor Kelly Kane. Check it out. It's free, AmericanWatercolor.net. And coming up after the interview, I'll be answering art marketing questions in the Marketing Minute. But first, let's get right to the interview with Michael Holter. Michael Holter, welcome to the PleinAir podcast.
Hey, how are you, Eric?
I'm great, Michael. Honored to have you here today. Let's start, for the people who might not be familiar, tell everybody what it is you do. What is your secret sauce, your specialty?
Well, I've been an artist for many years in various ways, a creative person in general, but what's happened in recent years is I've put more attention into my watercolor painting. Really got a kickstart when I was doing portraits and figurative pieces in watercolor. Seems like a lot of watercolor painters really thought they were pretty intriguing, because I think a lot of painters don't like to approach the human figure. And so it got a lot of attention, and so that, I think, is kind of the thing that kicked a lot of it into gear. And then I also do landscapes, and have been doing more of that lately, of course. But
well, you also do, from what I remember, you do a lot of plein air work, including a lot of plein air work in terms of working with models on location in natural light.
We do some of that, and my plein air work is. Unfortunately, I don't get to do enough of it, but it is a real vital thing. It's such an important part of painting and learning and growing and observing. I think one of the biggest things that happens every time I'm out, painting outdoors is just the things I learn about the environment and the things that you can take back in the studio. That stuff is really vital.
So let's kind of go backwards and talk a little bit about how you got to where you are from here. When did this painting thing begin for you?
Well, interestingly enough, one of my first paintings I ever did was a plein air painting. I was a young man with a vision to do something, and I didn't know what it was. I didn't have much training in high school or anything like that, so it took me a while to figure it out. Once I got that straightened out through sort of a little bit of divine intervention, I began to pursue an art degree, and some of my first paintings were PleinAir. And so I got an art degree, did some years teaching high school art, had a small gallery, had a lot of fun and a fair amount of success with that. Ended up moving into getting a master's degree in more of a commercial side of things, visual communication. And so I ended up shifting a little my career toward the commercial things, and still painted throughout that time.
So you were doing illustrations?
A few illustrations along the way, because I kept doing art. But I was more of a creative director, art director, and then graphic design creative director. I led a lot of creative teams over the course of time, and then I had my own small graphic design business for a while, which I had a studio and painted and exhibited during that time as well. But so I've done a little bit of everything, but it's always been in that, in a creative mode, which is been very satisfying for me.
Well, one of the things that I think is also interesting about you, when you and I got to know each other recently, it was very clear that you have a very good marketing mind, and I think that's one of the things we'll talk about a little bit on this podcast as well, because you come out of the advertising and promotion side of things a little bit, and you've done a pretty terrific job of getting a lot of people to pay attention to you. And so I think that would be helpful for other people. Does that sound like a deal? We'll talk a little bit about that.
Absolutely. Yeah. We can, I guess, one of the things that is relevant to somebody out there that's interested in painting and making a career out of it, or even even in a small way making things happen, is just you have to have some kind of a focus on a marketing plan to a degree. It may not have to be a written and complicated thing, but I think some kind of a plan would help anybody.
Well, that just sounds boring.
Yeah, it does take a lot of work, actually. It takes time, it takes energy, but
well, what about the artist who wants to make a good living but just doesn't really want to do marketing? How do you deal with that?
Well, I know, quite frankly, you're the expert in that area. You've got a lot of resources, and it's all kinds of things available. But I think the best thing, social media is a big thing. Getting a grip on that, learning how to define what it is you really want to do and what you can do. What are your capabilities? I think mine initially, when I decided to pursue more seriously the career part of this in the last about 8 years ago, I knew that I could teach. I used to teach. I knew that people wanted to learn about my painting techniques, and so I focused on finding workshop opportunities. And so I did emailing and calling and just hunted out every opportunity I could, and that was kind of the beginning of a sequence of things that led to other things.
What does that mean? What does that mean? Workshop opportunities? Does that mean you were going to them, or you were?
Teaching.
Teaching them.
I've taken some workshops as well, and I do that when I want to learn something I haven't learned from before, or get some experience, or I kind of like to go in and see what other people do in their workshops when they teach, because I teach workshops. I teach about, I think on my books for next year right now, I have 13 or 14, and I'm still adding some. So
that's a lot.
Yeah, it's good though. I'm the kind of person that I need to be pushed sometimes, and being out there in front of people, having to, quote unquote, perform several times a week, every day, doing something in front of people and painting, and I like to teach. I like to give people something to take home and work on, and I get good good responses, and really look forward to the opportunities when they come up. And it also opens up doors for sales. I have more sales probably through workshops than almost anything.
Well, one of the things that people don't necessarily realize is that a lot of artists are collectors, and a lot of artists buy a lot of paintings, and so workshops are certainly a great way to sell paintings, and to also acquire paintings at really reasonable prices, because typically at a workshop obviously you don't have the gallery markup, and usually it's pretty good deals.
Yeah. Unframed, and none of the extra stuff that goes with buying art.
So Michael, I want to just continue on this marketing thing for just a minute, and then we'll kind of move on to some other stuff. But the big challenge for a lot of artists, a lot of us are artists because we don't necessarily want to fit into the mainstream world in other ways. We want to paint, we want to draw, we want to sculpt, whatever it happens to be. And yet, if we want to make a living of it, we have to figure out how to fit that into our life. You probably have a little bit of a natural leaning in that direction. At least that's the impression I got when you and I sat down recently. But how do you help people kind of determine a little bit more about how do they get the right mindset to follow through on this stuff?
There's a lot of different things I've thought about in that vein. And one of the things that I recognize from my past is early on in my wife and I, in our marriage, I decided, I was teaching school, and I decided that even though I had a 10-month pay salary thing, I had 2 months where I didn't get paid. I figured out that one summer I thought I would just not find a summer job, and I would go to art shows. I found out there were little places where you could sell paintings and things. And I did that as a young man, and I thought, I learned a lot. You get out there and you put your work out in front of people, and you find out what sells, what doesn't sell, and you become, and it is sales and marketing. You got to learn how to present your work, present yourself, get out there and take the criticisms. And people are very unintentionally sometimes say the worst things to you.
Yeah. Oh, that looks just like a photograph.
I love that frame. Yeah, I've heard that sometimes. It's hilarious. Or it looks just like a photograph, and for me, that's not a compliment.
Well, and how do you get used to taking the rejection? Because it's personal. It's your work. You've put your heart and soul into your work. Yeah,
and it is a little bit unnerving sometimes. I think and that's one of the things, again, kind of going back to my students, and when I try to talk to them about all of this part of marketing themselves is really taking pride in what you do, and ownership, and feeling confident. So many people have been stepped on early in their life by an art teacher who didn't, or a teacher who didn't know the right things to say, and they still carry the wound from that for several decades, and I sometimes have to tell them, hey, if what you say you are is what you are. In many ways, you've got to just pursue it, be proud of it, be willing to take the criticism.
I was talking about this recently in one of my Sunday coffee blogs, where you have to be willing to change your story. We kind of get stuck in these stories. Somebody says something hurtful to us 30 years ago, and we're still clinging to that something hurtful, which may or may not have been intended to be hurtful. But sometimes you just got to let go of that stuff. And I had some pretty bad experiences in high school art class myself. I never thought about them until this moment, and realized, maybe that kind of got in the way all these years, and maybe it wasn't why I didn't pursue art earlier. Because I was kind of clinging to an old story.
Yeah, no, it's true. I think one of the problems that I think artists have, beginning artists, or even artists that have painted for a while, is not knowing what style or where they fit, and sometimes it's just better to just really enjoy the painting, enjoy the process, enjoy. With watercolor, there's so many beautiful parts of just the paint flowing on the paper with the water and the colors mixing, and just in some ways, I admire those people who are not objective painters because they can just enjoy that. Whereas, if we're doing representational work, we're a little bit constrained by having to make it look like something. But there's so much beauty in just the physical part of painting, and there's so much enjoyment that we get when we're doing it, if we're doing it in the right way, and just not worrying about it.
You said something else that I just wanted to touch on very quickly. You talked about how when you're out there, you get a lot of experience. And I think that's a really, really important thing, is that, you just got to get yourself out there, because you kind of learn to thicken up your skin a little bit. When you have lots and lots of rejection, but lots and lots of positives, you kind of, you hang on to the positives and kind of ignore the rejection, and then you won't let it bother you quite so much. But the other thing you said I'm curious about is you talked about find out what sells. That's kind of a turnoff to a lot of painters, the idea that I don't want to paint what sells, I want to paint what I paint. How do you deal with that in your head? How do you deal with that in your soul?
That's a good one, because and I struggle with that at times. Back to PleinAir, I guess I was recently at the Outdoor Painters Society PleinAir paint out. We were in Rockport, Texas, down on the Gulf Coast, where the hurricane had hit a year ago, and so we were down there, and it was a great thing to be there and support the community. But I realized, in painting, I'm painting boats and various things, and I'm paying particular attention to the drawing to get it pretty accurate. And I sort of struggle with, I know people around here are going to want, a certain degree of realism, but at the same time, I like to be a little bit impressionistic, and so there's this sort of struggle sometimes. How much do you do? I mean, there's people that will count every rope on a rigging, and that's not the kind of painting I do. And so you still have to be, you want it to be an honest portrayal of what it is you're painting, but that the liberty to go beyond that is the fun part. So there's that kind of always that little thing in the back of the mind. I think when you're trying to, and a PleinAir thing like that, you're thinking about an award perhaps for a painting, and you think, so the judge is an audience, and then you got people who will come through and hopefully buy something, and so you're always, there's always that there, and unfortunately I think I let that push me sometimes in the wrong direction and get hung up on stuff that you shouldn't.
Well, I think the other thing is you kind of you filter that out with okay, what are my choices to make a living painting something that I don't love painting all the time, or to paint for a hobby and make a living doing something I absolutely hate doing. I think part of me would say I'd rather be painting something that maybe isn't as exciting. Now, you have to paint for yourself. You have to find times to paint what you love. And I really believe that if you paint what you're really passionate about and you paint what you really love, it'll come through in the painting and it'll sell because of that.
Yeah.
So I'm not necessarily advocating, because everybody wants little red barns, you go paint little red barns. But I guess in some regards it beats the heck out of working in a job that you hate.
Yeah. And I think, part of my background out of the commercial world is whether it was graphic design and work in that area, or even some illustrations, which I was able to have occasional illustration work. Anytime a commercial artist is doing an illustration for some client, you really have to swallow your pride, your ego, and because you just are, whatever the client wants is what you got to do. I mean, you do your thing, but usually you have some other influences. And then I've never had any real horrific stories personally, but some people have. Some artists who are tremendous artists, have gotten out of that field entirely because it's just too hard to work in that environment. So there's always that kind of thing to deal with. And I think too, one of the things about commercial work is that is kind of the fun part about why I liked it was it's a collaborative thing. It's like I played music, so I played in groups of people, and I've worked in an advertising world where there's groups of people, and so there's something about the energy that you get from working with others, which in the painting world, I'm in my studio right now, and there's paintings around me, and nobody else, just you on you on the phone, and it can be kind of an isolated thing, and that's why I like workshops. I like to get out there with the people.
Yeah, that's why I like plein air painting too, is because I get out with people after being sequestered in my office all day.
And I was there at ACE in Santa Fe my first time to go. It was a phenomenal event, and everybody should try to go to that or to the next one. But it's a great experience. A lot of people, like-minded people, have a wonderful time together. It's great.
Michael, you were in the gallery business too.
Yeah, in a small way. Like I think I mentioned early on when I was teaching, we opened up a small gallery we were in a resort town in Minnesota, small town that would blossom into this rather large community in the summer times. And so as a school teacher, I had the summers free, so we got a space, opened up a gallery. I knew a lot of artists, craftspeople, from weavers to woodworkers to all kinds of people. So we had a lot of work in there, consigned work, and then I sold paintings. And it was a good, successful thing. It was only in the summers. But it was another one of those experiences of learning about the marketing side, I guess, of art and crafts, even, what sells, what doesn't, what draws people in, all those kind of things.
What does draw people in?
Well, when I used to go to art fairs, which I've done, I always felt like coming away from those that if I was to start doing those again, I would want to be a jeweler. Because a jeweler comes in with a suitcase or two and flops it open on a table. Everybody hangs around them all day and buys stuff, and then they just fold it up and leave. And the potters and the sculptors and the painters, we're schlepping stuff, and it's just some shows I found again were great for selling art. Some weren't. So you learn a lot of things about the way the marketing is presented for a particular show and whether it fits your product, I guess.
What is it that you learned as an artist becoming a gallery owner or director that most artists need to learn to understand when dealing with a gallery?
Well, I think one of the biggest things is, to me, and even now as a person who has been in a few galleries, I don't really have any great successes in those right now. But I think I look for somebody that really wants to work for me. Wants to not just stick my stuff on the wall to say they have it. But that they actually really believe in my work and want to present it, want to talk about it, want to give me a fair shot, especially when there's this competition within the gallery. And that's I think a big one. And so many galleries I've been in don't really treat watercolor very, very well.
Yeah, why is that?
Well, I think it's still considered a sketching medium. A lot of pastel is considered a painting medium, which is odd to me. But watercolor, for some reason, they think of sketches and think of the nice, little praying watercolor set you got in elementary school, and people don't have a perception of it. And on top of that, the reflection of glass, the whole presentation of watercolor sometimes in the gallery setting, they don't they say people don't like it, and I think there's some truth to that because of reflections. And I think there's a bias on the gallery owners because they have to frame it and mat it and get glass and do it differently than if they're a frame shop. They love it, but if they're gallery per se, they don't want to do it. They just want to get a painting and put it in a frame.
Well, there's a lot of change in the way that people are presenting watercolor now. A lot of watercolorists are not putting glass in.
That's correct. And I'm doing that. I'm using the varnishes to coat the surface, and really, to my way of thinking, it turns the watercolor sort of into an acrylic painting. I mean, a watercolor / acrylic because it's sealed. It's not going to go anywhere.
So how do you do that? What's that process like?
With the depending on if when I go to a PleinAir event, I pre-prepare the panels that I use and have the paper mounted. Use the gel medium and mount the paper onto the board so it's already mounted. If I paint it in the studio or normal painting just on the 140-pound paper, I then mount it after I paint it. Same process basically, and then once it's mounted and fully dry, really, really, really dry, I will then spray it with an acrylic varnish. It's got to be an acrylic varnish, and several coats. Some people get even more involved and put more layers of things on there and get it kind of almost get it smooth and slick, but I don't do that. I just spray it several times to get it sealed real well, and they're well received, and some watercolor shows accept them that way. I've been in the American Impressionist Society show several times, and the paintings I send there are usually just mounted that way and presented in a frame without any matting and without glass. So it's more and more people are doing it. I think galleries seem to be appreciative of that because again, they don't want that glass and reflection thing.
Now you're also doing oil painting, is that right?
I do some oils. Yeah, I wish I did more, but I do oils. Yeah.
Now, why do you say that? I
guess part of it is I want to do more larger things. I want to do, and of course, there are a lot of people doing really large watercolors too. But I shouldn't say it that way, really. But I love oils. I think they're beautiful. I just think they're great, and I've just not worked with them as much as watercolors. So when I get into the oils, it's a much more difficult process for me. Watercolors are simpler to execute for me, and I've learned all the shorthand that I need to create what I need to create. In oils, it's a little different, some different techniques and different things. So I just wish I had more time to do more of it.
There's a guy in Saranac Lake, New York, who's a fabulous artist. His name is Tim Fortune, and he's getting watercolor paper that has to be, I'll bet it's 6 feet tall by 4 feet, 5 feet wide, and he's doing these giant watercolor paintings. They're just fabulous. So, there's no limitation. I suppose the limitation is the size of the paper you can get. I don't know how big you can get.
You can get rolls, and that's where these people start off with. You typically, I've got a friend here that Stephen Zhang, who's very, very good with wonderful watercolors, and he does large. I mean, his are all 30 by 40 and 48 by 60, and he stretches them over a stretcher just like you would a canvas, and you wet them down, stretch them, and you get this really great surface. The only challenge then is that what do you do? Then do you varnish them, or do you put them on? If you put them on the glass, at that point, or even plexiglass, they become very, very heavy.
So talk to me about putting figures in, because you use a lot of figures in your scenes. Even your landscape scenes, I noticed that, oftentimes if you're doing like an architecture scene, you're putting a lot of figures in it, sometimes the landscapes. And of course you're doing figure work outdoors as well. So let's talk about figures a little bit.
Well, yeah, I think for years I avoided figures. I was one of those, like some of my students, when I teach my landscape workshops, I'll have them work on figures in the landscape, and it's a challenge for a lot of them to kind of get the feel of it. And I think one of the biggest things of putting figures in is really about the scale, especially in a architectural, street scene or something like that. There's it adds the scale of what's there, the building size, and it just adds that believability. That's if you have this empty street with nothing in it, it kind of seems a little peculiar. Landscapes, I could get by with it back in the day. I didn't have to have anybody in there, but eventually I figured I'd better add some people. So I do like having figures in. I think that really adds that human element that that we relate to people, and it's an important part. I'm not a wildlife painter, so I never have really included wildlife much in my paintings, but I'm more apt to put people in. One of the things about again, people, and one of the things I have to work on with my students is a lot of times my students don't understand the perspective that's created when you show a group of people on a street or something like that, and how you can really create depth and distance by adding a few people. And it's one of those things that me making a building scene, a streetscape look real and have some interest is to create that depth, get the person to look into this two-dimensional surface, and that's really kind of a key thing when adding people and so on.
So what's the trick on that in perspective? Isn't it that you have to take the head of the individual that has to be basically in line with the horizon?
That's correct. If you're on the same level as everybody on the street, for instance, walking down the street.
Yeah, but if you're looking down, it's going to be different.
Flat street. If you're looking at a different angle, it's different, or if it's a hill. But if you're on a regular level street, your eye level or the horizon line is would be, and if everybody was the same height as me, they would all have their heads on the same level. Now the ones further away, they'd be smaller and the body would be shorter. The ones closer, the head would be larger and their body would be taller. So you get this depth, and it's very easy to see once you get it in your head. Sometimes people just don't see that until you show them, and it's basic perspective. It isn't real complicated perspective, but it really adds a lot to the feeling of depth in a scene.
That's something that I think a lot of artists struggle with is perspective.
Yep.
This is something that it doesn't seem to get a lot of attention. You oftentimes will see people who have done these architectural renderings, and there's just something is off, and you can't, sometimes you can't pinpoint it, but if you really study it, it's usually because they maybe don't have a feel for perspective. Is that something you can talk about? I know it's something you could show, but
there are some things that and I agree with that totally. There's sometimes when I see a wonderfully rendered painting, and it's beautifully done, and then there's just something wrong, and I see what it is because I do know perspective pretty well. I started off in architecture in college, which I didn't finish, but I have a sense for buildings and structure. But anyway, the thing that I talk about in my workshops, there are really, to me, there are three levels of perspective. One is aerial perspective, the atmosphere, the whole feeling you get when you have something lighter in the background and it gets darker, and the values get darker as you get forward. That's a key one. Linear perspective, then, of course, is the straight lines of a building or the lines of a road going down the distance, and that includes the size of people and all those parts. And then there's another part that I call solar perspective, which is, I don't know if anybody else uses that term, but for me it's all about where is the sun. The artist the job of the artist is to show where the light is. Where's the light coming from? And the way to do that is through light and shadow or that kind of thing. And if you consciously think about where the light source is and have your shadows appropriately placed, well, that's what I sort of the solar perspective idea. You develop a real sense of reality. Everybody viewing that will know where the sun is, even if they don't see the sun, or even if they don't think about it. They'll understand everything in the painting refers back to a particular point, and that's the same as linear perspective, and it's the same as aerial. They all go together.
Do you have a particular way that you remind yourself to do this? It can't necessarily be an afterthought, especially in watercolor. How do you help us understand how you get that sense of where the light's coming from?
Well, and then with watercolor, usually it's, a sketch is included. I mean, a drawing is drawn. There's pencil lines, and so I'll usually have a basic pencil line or two that will be my main, shadow lines or something like that. The people that you put in the street, for instance, the shadow coming off of them is going to tell you a lot about where the light is. So you just have a few things that you need. You don't need to have everything precise either. You can be pretty abstract with lots of it, as long as you have some key things really sort of pointing to where the light is, I guess. It's just a sort of, I think through those things in the beginning stages, how light is my value going to be in the distance. The image may not be that light when I look at it, either the photograph or if I'm outside, but I know in order to make it have depth, I'm going to make it lighter. I'm going to push it deeper, make it cooler, make it more distant, then bring my middle value in, a little darker value, more middle value, and then bring in my darker shadows and show the way the light hits.
Now, will you tend to make a sky warmer on one side of the sky and cooler on the other?
If the light is coming from that direction, yes, oftentimes.
Yeah.
And then there's this is not a I'm not a one who tries to. I'm not a photorealist, and I'm not one who tries to paint real accurately realistic stuff when I'm outdoors. I want to get an impression. So whether or not the light is hitting a background the same as it's hitting the foreground doesn't matter to me. Sometimes it's more of what the impression is, and the impression might all of a sudden be, wow, the light's popping through an opening in the clouds, and that may not be what the day was like at all, but that's the impression it might end up with, so.
I've heard painters say that sometimes it's about, you make the sky darker in the corners so that you kind of create the effect of the earth, kind of the sky going over you. Do you do anything like that?
I haven't at times. I used to. Well, there's different influences I've had. One of the early ones is Rex Brandt at California Watercolors, and he kind of taught a lot about how to create on watercolor paper, particularly a real passage for your eye by basically, and it's not just with him, but other watercolors, is painting the first washes, which are, pretty much just local color and tone, and making the edges darker, making a light passage through the painting, and by creating that kind of sort of subtle underpainting, then whatever you put on top of it begins to bring your eye into a focal point in the center, or wherever you want it to be, not centered per se, but so that's a kind of a technique or a style that some people use. I don't purposely always do that, but yeah, that's certainly in my mind. Yeah.
Now, what do you find, since you're doing 17, 18, 20 workshops a year, what do you find are the things that your students are most hung up on, or the most common mistakes that you're having to correct when you've got them together?
I think really common stuff would include painting, being really timid, not being very bold, not being very willing to make mistakes, not being able to work with a large brush. They're sort of hung up on the small brush, dabble kind of thing, instead of getting a big brush and going to work. It's sometimes it's just getting them loosened up. I'll ask my students at almost every workshop. I'll say, I'll ask them, how many of you would like to paint more loosely? And I mean, 100%. They all say that. And then so I say, okay, when I tell you to do certain things, do it, because they all will just resort back to the same things. Another major thing I think is with watercolor is a tendency along that same line is to overwork areas, to keep pushing the paints around into the areas, trying to manipulate it. If they're used to acrylics or some other medium, which many of them are, it's hard to just lay your watercolor down and let it be. I mean, you can do some changing and you can do some things, but a lot of times that's when mud starts to happen. You can throw all kinds of colors together and it won't be mud, but if you start pushing them around with a brush, that's what they end up as, mud.
So what are you working on these days?
Well, I kind of jump back and forth from some portraits that I've got and some landscapes, and I'm kind of preparing for another workshop that I have next week. But it kind of goes back and forth. And I've got I have a large show at an art center coming up in January, so I need to prepare a whole series of things for that are new. I just feel like I have to. So
that's a lot of pressure. How many paintings do you put in a show like that?
Since many of mine are not too large, it may be 30, something like that.
Oh, you can get that done in an afternoon.
Well, with watercolor, you can do a lot fast if they work. The thing about watercolor, sometimes the way I like to paint fairly spontaneously, the ones that work are great. The ones that don't, I don't want them to see the light of day.
Yeah, well, it's not just watercolor.
Yeah, right. And I think, back to the students, I think one of the things that I like to encourage them in is that there's failure in this business. Not everything succeeds, and not every brush stroke you put down is exactly the way you wanted it to be. And I give them lots of opportunity to see me make mistakes, and then hopefully try to correct those and get them to success, because I think that's part of watching someone paint who's got some experiences. They learn by watching, and that they can see, that would have been a disaster had I done it, but look at it starting to work, I think that's that's one of the wonderful things about workshops, that if people take workshops just to watch the person struggle through things, because there's always issues.
Yeah, it's a struggle, that's for sure. Well, any advice? We have a lot of people who listen who are kind of. I get this question a lot. That's why I keep bringing it up. What advice do you have for new painters? And then the second question, which is part B, is a lot of people are asking, how do I get myself to the next level? I'm not a new painter, but how do I push myself to the next level? What I'm doing isn't necessarily working.
Well, and I think that kind of falls into a couple different categories too, like in terms of part of the encouragement I always have for my students is that to enter shows, to get yourself out there, to see how your work stacks up against other people, and try to compete, even if it's on a local small show, because I think that helps you. And I think the average person who's painting does have a thin skin sometimes, and they do need to get out there and be willing to to present themselves in that way. Then there's others that are beyond that, and they've been doing that, but they haven't really gotten maybe they've gotten into a few shows, but they've tried some bigger shows and never gotten in. We all do that. We all struggle to get into the big shows, or I do anyway. I've been fortunate to get into almost everything out there, but it's still hard. And I think the thing that I would stress for people is really concentrate on composition, design, really put some energy into that, and that goes into the fundamentals of when you start your painting. What are you choosing to paint, and how are you composing that painting? What can you move around in the painting to make a better composition? Or how do you change the lighting to make a better composition, or whatever it is? All those things are key. I've judged shows, and when I'm judging a show, most jury now is done by on a computer screen. So you get all these images you pop up on your computer screen, and you look at them to select them. What are you going by? Well, the first thing is the composition. That's the key thing that you see immediately is does it work? And the composition is so key.
Well, how do you make it work? Is there a particular method that you're using that really makes composition work for you?
It's the basic principles of design. I try to teach that in a basic way when I'm doing my workshops. Balance and repetition, contrast, dominance, unity. What are those principles? And studying those a little bit and getting a handle on that and really trying something. What I do, like especially I find it true with my figurative work, because I shoot photos, a lot of those, and then I bring them into my computer, and I use the computer screen, and I use that to compose the image. I crop it. I have certain things that I like to do. I like to see. I don't like to have a lot of space around the head. I usually crop in tight. I like to have different spatial, different size background spaces, a small, a medium, a large. For instance, I don't really like to have just one big shape all the way around the head. So I like to break it down that way. And I think what happens is when you do that initial composition on a thing like that, and then you paint it well, hopefully, and then you submit that as a painting you want to enter in a show, the first thing the judge sees is, I like this composition. Look at the way that, look at these things here. Well, yeah, you can just start painting and hopefully end up with a good composition. But by spending time initially, and that goes back to, if you're doing PleinAir, what do you do thumbnails? Do you do value studies? Do you take a camera and use that as a tool? I don't care what tools my students use. I just want them to use what's available and create some interesting subjects, interesting paintings. And a lot of it comes from that initial decision making that happens at the beginning stage.
And you have a new video coming up. Do you talk about composition in your video?
Yes, there's a brief portion in there that I don't get into it too much, but it kind of does work into the whole video, really, because it's a lot about how to compose and how to execute and how to create a winning painting. Yeah, that'll be in there.
Well, this has been fabulous. I think that there's so many more things that we could probably learn. Any last final tips for the people trying to get to the next level?
I'd say work at it, and by that I mean, I'm gonna pull up a quote here that I have by Stephen King, the author, and he says that amateurs sit and wait for inspiration, and he says the rest of us just get up and go to work.
Yeah.
And I think there's a part of the whole thing of being an artist is it is a lot of work, and I mean it's a joyful thing, but at the same time you've got to put in time, you've got to work at it, you got to think it through. If you're marketing yourself, there's a marketing aspect to it that you've got to be involved in some way or another, unless you're so fortunate somebody else does it for you. But and then as far as the painting, you've got to continue to grow. I mean, that's the beauty of this whole art thing to me, is that this is a never-ending growth process. I don't ever see myself getting to the point where I think I've made it. It's always a growth thing. So.
What do you do to grow for yourself outside of painting? Do you take any workshops anymore, or do you do anything?
I do take some workshops with very, very few. I've taken a few from some oil painters that I really like. Chong Wong, you know him from down there.
Yep.
And a few others, and then some of the oil painters. I mean, the watercolors that the Joseph Bukvik, Alvaro Castanet. Some of those that I want to watch them paint, if nothing else.
Did you watch Alvaro? You were at the PleinAir convention last year.
Yes, I was.
So you watched Alvaro paint on stage.
Oh yeah.
Well, I thought that was pretty interesting, because I was sitting there watching that thing, and it just didn't seem to be coming together. And I think the guy's a real showman, because all of a sudden he puts in a couple of things that kind of connected the dots, and the whole thing was like, wow, how did he do that?
Yeah, no, he's really good at that. He's got a great style in the way he presents the work as he does it. He's just a master.
I've never seen Joe Zabukvik paint in person. I'm looking forward to that. What's that like?
Same. I mean, similar. He's much more. He's not quite as flashy, but he's very very good and excellent painter. He'll be a little more, probably explain a little more what he's doing.
Yeah.
And but his work is just incredible. His atmospheric stuff is just beyond compare.
I think it took us about 7 years to get him to come to the convention, so we're pretty excited.
But I'm thrilled, because I'm going to be there. I'm gonna see him again. That'll be great.
Yeah, that's well. You're on the watercolor faculty as well this year, yes?
Yes, I'm looking forward to it, and it's a great time.
Yeah, San Francisco is going to be fun too, because there's so much to paint there. Just endless amounts of scenery, landscapes, cityscapes, seascapes, you name it. There's just so much around there. You got the redwoods. It's going to be great.
Never ending.
Wine country. What that would be winescapes, I guess.
Yeah, that would probably be it.
Yeah. Well,
no,
Michael,
that should be fun.
Thank you for being on the PleinAir podcast today. It's a pleasure getting to know you. I think you're a rock star painter. Clearly, everybody else thinks so too, because it's been fun watching your career soar. So thank you again for doing this.
It's my pleasure, and I'm honored to be here, and thank you, Eric, very much.
This has been the PleinAir podcast with PleinAir Magazine's Eric Rhodes. You can help spread the word about PleinAir painting by sharing this podcast with your friends. And you can leave a review or subscribe on iTunes so it comes to you every week. And you can even reach Eric by email, eric@pleinairmagazine.com. Be sure to pick up our free ebook, 240 PleinAir Painting Tips by some of America's top painters. It's free at pleinairtips.com. Tune in next week for more great interviews. Thanks for listening.
Well, thank you again to Michael Holter.
This is the Marketing Minute with Eric Rhodes, author of the #1 Amazon bestseller, Make More Money Selling Your Art, Proven Techniques to Turn Your Passion into Profit.
Well, in the Marketing Minute, I try to answer your marketing questions. You're welcome to send them along, eric@pleinairmagazine.com, and you're welcome to remain anonymous if you wish. Here's a question from anonymous Tony A. Says, I live in a market with a Walmart mentality. How can I get a decent price on my paintings if everyone is looking for a bargain? Well, there's several answers to this question, Tony. First, every town has a Walmart mentality. There's a certain percentage of every town that is looking for a bargain. And we're all looking for bargains, let's admit it. But there are affluent towns, and there are Walmart mentalities in even affluent towns. So for those who are shopping at Walmart, I have a saying, stand in the river where the money is flowing. In most towns, there are affluent neighborhoods with doctors, lawyers, business people, business owners. Somebody owns all those businesses in that town, and they live in good neighborhoods typically. They have places they go like country clubs and social clubs, and maybe that doesn't exist in your town, but it does in most, even a lot of small towns. So you need to work where the money is flowing. Go where the money is flowing. Stand in the river where the money is flowing. Secondly, if the money isn't flowing in your town, don't waste your time. Go where the money is flowing. Your choice is either discounting your paintings, and if you don't feel like you're getting the price that they're worth and you need to get the money they're worth, then go to a place where you can get your worth. That's trying to get into a gallery in a town where you can get your price. Also, money flows to known brands no matter who you are. If you're not known, it's hard to get your price. You'd be surprised how much more price you can get, even from people looking for a bargain. If they know who you are, they know about you, they think about you. Fourth, I think every artist needs a dual strategy, meaning a local strategy and a national strategy as a hedge against problems. So I grew up in a small town in Indiana, and there was an affluent community there, but the main manufacturer in our town all of a sudden left, and it was employing most of the people, and it really put the town in difficult times for about 20 years until it got its act together. If all of your business is in one place and something like that happens, you're going to have a problem. So have a local strategy and then have a national strategy as a hedge against problems. You might also consider a regional strategy, right? So like maybe another town nearby or maybe another town in your state is a really good place for you to be selling and building your brand if it's not in your town. It doesn't have to be in your town. You just have to figure out how to sell paintings. So this is a good way to give you people who are buyers on a national level who collect paintings, who are going to be reading magazines like PleinAir magazine or Fine Art Connoisseur, or you might, you might target them in other ways. Also, usually when people tell me there's no money in their town, I tell them it's there. You just have to find it. You got to hang with the right people. You got to remember that you may not be hanging with the same people who are you're going to be your clients. If you're struggling financially, if you didn't grow up in an affluent neighborhood, that doesn't mean it's not out there. There are wealthy people everywhere, even in small farm towns. I mean, sometimes there's a wealthy farmer. You just never know who's going to buy a painting and put it on their wall. So you just got to find out where they are. You got to spend time around them. You got to brand yourself around them. You got to get exposed around them and do the best you can, because there are people who love and buy art. You can build a list of those people locally, regionally, nationally, etc. Next question is from Jeremy. Jeremy says, I'm new to the market and I'm just starting to sell my art. Are library shows and shows where I can't sell something worth my time? Well, I think it depends on what you consider a waste of time. Is building awareness of your name, your brand in your community a waste of time? Is having your name in places where people can see and fall in love with your artwork a waste of time? When you're starting out as an artist, you need to do anything and everything you can to sell finished works or to expose finished works. And it's definitely worth your time for the learning experience of mounting a show and getting used to doing that kind of thing, because you're going to do it your whole career. And you're going to learn something by talking to people at the show. If you have an opening, you get a chance to talk to people. You get a chance to practice talking to people about why you painted, tell your story, talk about your art, find out what their needs are, learn and engage people and start conversations around your artwork. And the better you get at doing that, the better you're going to have throughout your entire career. You're going to be connecting your artwork with potential collectors. And just because they say you can't sell at the library show doesn't mean you can't sell. You know, if somebody says, hey, can I buy this painting? Are you going to say no? You're going to say, here's my card, contact me and we'll work something out. And also, it's a great way for you to build your list. You know, put a thing in there when everybody comes to visit the show, ask them to write down their name and their email address, and happily send your newsletter to them. And of course, you can find other ways to get names, you know, exchange business cards and so on while you're there. But I think everything is worthwhile. Everything's a learning experience. And no, maybe you're not going to sell direct right away, but I think you want to kind of get in the habit of learning how this process goes. It's going to help you a lot. Also, build lists, build brands, and get publicity. You know, could you get your name in the local media, local websites, local newspapers, et cetera, for doing this show? Can you get pictures of your stuff out there? It's going to drive people to your website. Don't forget about that. Today's podcast was sponsored by the PleinAir Convention, the world's largest plein air event. We're going to see you there in April, San Francisco and wine country. It's going to be phenomenal. San Francisco is the most popular destination yet. Learn more at PleinAirConvention.com. It's also sponsored by our free weekly newsletter, American Watercolor, with editor Kelly Kane. Comes to you by email every week for free. Check it out, AmericanWatercolor.net. Use .net, not .com. Sounds like a song. Okay, also, if you've not seen my blog, where I talk about life, art, and all kinds of other things on Sunday mornings, comes every Sunday morning. It's called Sunday Coffee. You can find it at coffeewitheric.com. You know, I love doing this. I love talking to painters. This is always fun. Let's do it again sometime, like next week. We'll see you then. My name is Eric Rhodes. I'm the publisher and the founder of PleinAir magazine. Remember, it's a big world out there. Go paint it. We'll see you.